Hi, and welcome. My name is John Hildebrand, and this is the Disruption Spiral, a four-part mini-series where I break down what happens when disruption hits mission-driven organizations. If you are a leader in a nonprofit, an NGO, a healthcare company, a higher education institute, or any organization where the mission is what brings people to the work, this series is for you. And in particular, if you have leadership responsibilities for guiding people through change and through unexpected disruptions, this is especially valuable for you. This series is four parts. So, part one, this episode, I'm going to introduce you to the model and share briefly about each of these tendencies that emerges to contribute to the downward spiral. And in the follow-up episodes, I'll be diving into each of these tendencies a little bit more deeply so that you can recognize them and work on reversing them. And ultimately, that's the goal. The goal is when you can see the spiral and you can understand the elements that contribute to it, you can do something about it. That's the work that I do with leaders and with organizations. And my hope is that through this series, you'll begin to recognize where these patterns emerge in your organizations, and you can give yourself opportunities to change them and to create more potential when disruption hits, as it's everywhere these days and is going nowhere. So, disruption is a reality. How can we make sure that it doesn't inevitably lead to dysfunction, but instead open up new opportunities for you and for your organization? So, what is the disruption spiral? If you're watching on video, you can see the image behind me. I'll briefly just walk you through what happens when disruption hits. First, a disruption is by definition something that changes the way that we operate, changes the system, changes process, and most of the time it's unexpected. So, our nervous systems respond to disruption as though they are threats. And specifically, our sympathetic nervous system kicks in. This is commonly known as the fight, flight, or freeze response. And when we perceive a threat and our sympathetic nervous system goes into gear, we have natural tendencies that arise. And when we're oriented toward threat, we don't see all the potential that comes when we're not under threat, right? And we have some tendencies that emerge individually, and then those are amplified within the organization. The first is the tendency to oversolve. And what I mean by oversolving is by focusing and putting resources behind understanding the problems that are emerging as a result of the disruption. Now, pretty much any disruption will generate significant problems for you and for the organization. We encroach into oversolving when we focus too much on the problems that are emerging and the deficits that are present, and not focusing on what the opportunities are, what our assets are, what examples of times that we've navigated things like this, what are the real opportunities here, and can we inquire about and organize around them as opposed to the problem? Now, many of the organizational management frameworks that we've been taught for decades focus on problem solving as the avenue to organizational change. Fortunately, there are many other approaches to organizational change, but again, this tendency to oversolve emerges because of a natural orientation toward and a response to what we perceive as threat. So that's tendency number one, to oversolve. Tendency number two is what I'm calling over-individualizing. What I mean here is when we identify more problems and our sympathetic nervous systems are kicked into overdrive, we tend to attribute the problems to individuals or small groups within the organization, rather than looking at the system and at the organizational level factors that are leading those people to respond in the way that you see as being problematic. This is classic. I see this in so many organizations where people start finger pointing and they say, if people in this part of the organization, in finance or in marketing or in operations, or if this one individual would respond in a different way, we wouldn't have this problem. The problems get isolated and attributed to individuals rather than looking at the factors that are leading that individual to act that way. This, again, is a result of our sympathetic nervous systems being in overdrive. We tend to try to simplify, isolate the problem, and eliminate the problem, and not see the complexity that's leading to the problem. Then, of course, we suggest and pursue solutions that are focused on the individual or the small group rather than the conditions that created and supported that behavior that you identify as problematic. So that's tendency number 2, over-individualizing. Tendency number 3 is over-sacrificing. And this is what I call the mission-driven accelerant that accelerates this downward spiral. If you're in a mission-driven organization, you probably know what I mean by over-sacrificing. This is where we put the mission and the work that we do over our own individual wellness, sustainability, and capacity to continue doing this work. Perhaps this is explicitly supported in your organization where boundaries and separation from work are discouraged explicitly. Oftentimes, this is implicitly supported, this tendency to over-sacrifice. So we see it modeled for us. We hear it in how people talk about taking time off or recovering. We see people hyper responsive to a need that comes up in the organization and their willingness to sacrifice what had been some restorative time for them. This tendency to over-sacrifice, what it does is it ensures that we stay in this sympathetic nervous system overdrive individually, right? And the really insidious part of these 3 tendencies together is that they build upon one another. As I mentioned, the more problems that we identify, the more rooted we are in our sympathetic nervous system. We're attributing them to individuals and we're pursuing solutions that are not effective. So then we have more and more problems that arise. And often individuals in mission-driven organizations will overextend themselves when there are more problems to address, right? When we overextend ourselves, we drive ourselves further into the sympathetic nervous system overdrive. We see more problems. We attribute them to individuals. And this cycle, this exacerbates this downward spiral toward dysfunction. Now, some of the dysfunctions that I see as a result of this downward spiral: fragmentation within organizations. So siloing, but not only siloing, but this chasm sort of being created between the different parts of the organization. Resistance to change, because we're seeing solutions pitched that are not actually resolving the problem. So people become more resistant to the idea that we're going to actually solve the problem. Leaders and individuals in the organization becoming more and more isolated as these challenges become weightier and weightier and more disruption hits. Disengagement of employees, clearly related to over-sacrificing, we get burnout. And of course, a natural consequence of this is turnover as well. So this is what I see as the direct line in many organizations, especially mission-driven organizations, from disruption directly to dysfunction. And as we live in an increasingly disrupted world and are navigating disruption of different kinds in our organizations on a daily basis, we need to find a way to reverse this spiral so that disruption doesn't inevitably lead to more dysfunction. As I mentioned, that's the work that I do. That is my mission in working with mission-driven organizations and leaders. And that's my intent behind this content. So that's an overview of the framework. In the next 3 episodes, I'll be diving into each of these tendencies a little bit more deeply to help you understand where they come from, why they spread across the organization, what evidence you might look for to see if they're present, and what you might start doing to reverse these tendencies. So stay tuned. Thanks for being here. Let me know, please, what resonates with you. Does this fit? Does this not fit? Is there something missing? And stay tuned for the next episodes where you'll get more. And I hope that, again, this contributes to your understanding of what's going on and ultimately helps you lead to new possibilities in your organization. Take care and talk to you soon.